Hello there. My name is Jeremy Bilson, and today I'll be doing my presentation on the loss of cultural identity, Indigenous Australians. I'll be covering the concepts of the different cultures, different parts of the culture within the Indigenous Australian societies, as well as how today we are able to actually make a positive impact, make a positive difference as educators. We'll be also covering some history and as well as that some different points of views and perspectives from Indigenous Australians who have actually been through a loss of their cultural identity. So today I'm going to start off in my introduction to point out that for any society, having cultural identity is crucial to live life comfortably with a sense of belonging. So I'm going to explore just how important it is to actually have a sense of belonging in the culture which you are living in and working in as well. Since Europeans have lived in Australia, Indigenous Australians have often felt forced, unfortunately, to conform to white culture while losing their cultural identity. So unfortunately, when Australians started coming to Australia a lot more, when Europeans started calling Australia home from the late 1700s onwards, there was a terrible amount, very heartbreaking amount of deaths, of separation, of slavery, of terrible things that had happened to the Aboriginal people. And due to that, even though it was hundreds of years ago, a lot of things have still actually had a negative impact on the way that Aboriginals are living and with their living conditions, but also viewed today by society. So today I actually want to explore a little bit about the culture that Aboriginals have had over thousands of years before Europeans have actually come to Australia. And we're going to start with the heading, A Cultural Identity That Is Worth Saving. And we're going to be looking at the beliefs now, some of the beliefs that the Aboriginal people have had. So firstly, the dream time. Dream time is a very important part of the Aboriginal culture and society. The dream time, as most people know in Australia, it is the stories that have been passed on from generation to generation, and in some way you can actually say that it's the religion of the Indigenous people. Some of the well-known stories include the Rainbow Serpent, which is one of the main, I guess you could say, religious figures of the Indigenous people. There are also many stories that have been passed on about different morals, about different animals, about why different things have happened, about why different land formations have actually come to be, and a lot of it has actually been about creation as well. So I can't spend too long on each of these points, but I wanted to talk now about the country because unlike the Europeans who have come and thought, hey, nobody owns this land, so we can take it as our own. The Aboriginals, wouldn't say they necessarily own the land, but they were definitely part of the land. They are definitely having a strong connection with the land, and as a part of that, they really felt like the land had a huge relationship and a huge part of their life, their daily culture. And part of their beliefs, they also had their traditions. They had their celebrations, such as even the European people did when they came to Australia. But because it was done in a different way, the Europeans unfortunately did not see that. Next point is the history. And the history had been passed on, again, from generation to generation. And this is very important. It's a very important part of the Australian Aboriginal culture, where unfortunately a lot of the history has been lost due to the amount of people that have been lost, and due to the fact that white Australians have unfortunately wanted the Indigenous people to conform to their societal norm. It hasn't been a very good experience for them in the long run. I've also put here societal relationships, and I wanted to focus on this point a little bit because in Aboriginal society, their belief for family and their belief for tribe is a very strong part of their life, when in Western culture and even today, white people are a lot more independent. Even though we live in families, it's a lot smaller groups than the bigger groups as well. The next slide that we've got here is talking about the art and expressions that that are just so beautiful in so many ways, and they are definitely worth being saved, worth being kept, and worth being passed on from generation to generation within the Aboriginal culture, but also just in Australia and the world culture in general. So firstly, we've got painting here. Painting does involve using ochre, which has been used for thousands of years by the Aboriginal people. Paint different colours, black, white, red, to be painted on their faces, on their body, but also in caves, in rocks. And this paint was used and still is used today, but it's been used for hundreds and also thousands of years to just pass on stories, pass on the history to other generations. I've got dance here. Again, we've got different festivals where the Aboriginals love to celebrate, maybe in a different way again to the Europeans, but they did have a great culture, and in some places definitely do have a great culture of dance. There's also a way that they had been dressing for hundreds of years that is worth remembering, worth passing on from generation to generation. There's song. So Aboriginals have beautiful singing voices, many of them. They had a different way of, again, singing and doing music. They often use didgeridoos, percussion instruments, and there's, amazing ways that the Aboriginals created music where it is definitely worth understanding more about how they actually did music. I'm a music teacher myself, and I absolutely love looking into the different ways that the Aboriginals have been using music and playing music in their culture for such a long time. And stories are just a huge part of the art in the Aboriginal culture. And a lot of the time, some of these things, such as the dance, the stories, the songs and the painting, all are used together to actually create a story and to pass down a story, and that's really special. There's a few ways that the Aboriginal people have, used different things for survival over the last few hundred years, thousands of years. Shelter has been, using trees or paper bark, as well as caves. Caves have been used predominantly by Aboriginals for a long time. Hunting, so using spears, using boomerangs, which are some very unique ways of hunting. But not only that, things such as setting traps and catching fish. There's been some great ways that must be passed on. Aboriginals have been using tools, sharpened tools and weapons, make rocks and wood into certain shapes to actually make tools. They've been doing this, and this technology really was far beyond that of many other cultures at that time, thousands of years ago. I've got bush foods or bush tucker, which they, after such a long time, the Aboriginals had created some great ways to experience food here in Australia, and I've tasted some of this myself, and it's definitely worth trying and checking out. I've got fire making here as well, which is an obvious one that they use. We're going to talk about the language now. So the studies show that there were about 250 Aboriginal languages in Australia at the time that the Europeans had arrived. Now this is a lot of languages, but unfortunately today there are only 145 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander languages that are still spoken in Australia, and only 18 of them are actually commonly used today. So it has shrunken a lot, and it is very important to protect these languages that also, as we've talked about, pass on these stories. As much of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander history has been passed down orally, it is important to the nation that these languages are well preserved. So the question we have now is, how have white people impacted the cultural identity of the Aboriginals? And we've discussed this very briefly already, but we're going to look at this next sentence. Since the 1700s, white people in Australia have been taking away the freedoms, the way of life that the Aboriginals have lived, that have been untouched for thousands of years, and this is such a sad thing to many people. To get an education and a good level of living to be treated fairly, heard and respected in today's modern society in Australia. Aboriginals have wrongly been encouraged to let go of their cultural identity and to embrace the white Australian culture. And we're going to actually have a look very soon at some studies that were done where we have some responses of some Aboriginal people who have felt this way. So a lot of the time these Indigenous Australians have taken away that it's been taken away their power and their voice to be heard, so they felt like they haven't been able to be heard. The heading here is the sad reality. So a study published by ABC News in Darwin, it was written by Eliana Lawford in 2016. She actually studied 500 Indigenous Australians in Darwin, and it's really interesting. There was a quote which says, "Daily I'm juggling with who I am, how I talk, how I act, and look, and whatever." This is from an anonymous respondent in the study. And the reason for this is because, there's so many ways that white Australians try to fit the Aboriginals in a box. You must do this to be successful, you must do that. But then there's also the pressure from the Aboriginal people saying how much of that you can do so that you can still fit in the Aboriginal society. So I find that very, very interesting. We're going to continue. This is some statistics that were actually shown within the study. Only 16% of non-Indigenous Australians tried to understand Aboriginal culture. So this was in a huge study there. Many respondents said they did not feel comfortable going out in public to restaurants or to shopping centres because they were scared of being stared at and treated differently. This is just simply is not fair that so many Australians, I believe it's 3.3% of Australians are Indigenous, and many feel like they can't actually be themselves and respected in their own country. Looking at some more statistics, over 650,000 Australians claim to have Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander heritage. The report's figures showed more than 50% of respondents felt Aboriginal people were not wanted. So this was in the city of Darwin. Over 90% said that Aboriginal people were talked to like they did not matter and were judged by stereotypes. I find this very saddening. So another question here, and I believe it's a very, very important question as educators, is how are we as educators to respond to this? We're going to have Aboriginal people in our classrooms, especially if you are going to be teaching in a rural area, and we definitely need to know this so that we can preserve the culture and way of life of Aboriginals and help them feel like they belong, help them feel like they are accepted and included in today's society. Well, to sum it up really, we need to embrace the cultural identity. So I'm going to go through a few points which I've studied but also strongly believe can actually assist us in providing a place for these Indigenous Australians to belong. So be informed of the student's culture and background. Try to understand them, on a personal level, but also understand the culture where they're coming from. Yes, it's different to the white Australian culture, but it's very important to know where that student might be coming from. Have a great level of empathy, which feels very obvious, especially if you're a Christian and working in a private school. But you need to know that we don't all feel and think the same things. You need to try to understand what that Indigenous student, what that other student may be feeling. Encourage the individual culture of all the students. So this doesn't only go for Indigenous students, but it also goes for people from any ethnicity or any traditional or cultural background that it actually might be in your class. Very important. Celebrate traditions and customs. Don't just celebrate the ones which you are accustomed to, which you know, but celebrate the ones that are important to your students that you may have in your class. The last one here is treat everyone equally, giving the equal right and opportunities. Now, it is very important to treat everyone the same and don't give people a leg up because of the cultural background that they've been given or the colour of skin that they have, but it is also important to recognise maybe some ways that you can help people, for example, Indigenous people, in some parts of Australia's society at the moment. Can't go too much in detail of this, in fear of running over time, but it is, sometimes there are benefits that are being done, and it's up to the teacher's responsibility to actually treat the students, every individual student, as fairly as possible. And that is what we are actually called to do as well, if you believe that, that Jesus is love, and we are called to love our students as well. And you may have noticed here that when we've said here, encourage the culture of all the students, it's not just so that we can make sure that the Aboriginal students actually feel like they belong and accepted, but it's important that the rest of our students who are not from Indigenous background actually understand the culture, and that they are able to know that when they're in society and they see Aboriginal people, just how important it is to also make them feel accepted, make them feel like they belong, make them feel like they can express themselves in their own culture, own society norm, and that here we are accepting other cultures and other backgrounds that may not be like our own. So again, I just believe it is so important to actually be inclusive of these Aboriginal people, be inclusive of the culture and the history that they have, and just respond in love with that. Here's my references. I hope that you've enjoyed this video. Please comment if you have anything to say. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so thank you very much.